Well, short version. I am athletic trainer. Worked in a lot of different settings, NFL, college, and then I quit in 2018. I did a mental health business for about a year, and then I stopped that just in the last December. So
Okay.
we did that, focusing on suicidal youth. We did that. We stopped
Okay.
that. A lot of reasons. Part of the long story. And then this year, I started working at my best friend works at a local university, Dixie State University in St. George, Utah.
Okay.
I started working with that, and then I also started also became a real estate agent out here as well. And so I started doing that this year, and so I'm just kind of all over the place. There's the
That's awesome.
short
I feel
version.
you.
So, but
Love
yeah,
it.
that mental health portion of it is a passion of mine. I like to advocate for it as much as I can, and um,
Wonderful.
so
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm assuming that's why we're here. Very cool.
Granted, I focused on a different uh, different what's the word I'm looking for, different group of people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that's it's something that's I'm passionate about, and is something that I see. I will get into it in the podcast,
Ah,
but yeah,
yeah.
so yeah, we did that, and it was a lot of fun. It helped a handful of people out. It's kind of crazy to see that on the front end, but it was cool. So
Perfect.
yeah,
Wonderful.
there's my short version.
All right, you ready? Here we go in
Let's do
three.
it.
Here we go in 3, 2, 1. One study that looked at 958 male and female student athletes from Division I colleges in 9 different sports from 2007 to 2011. 28% of them reported anxiety symptoms. 22 reported depression symptoms. Half of those had a combination of both, and those with depression were more likely to have anxiety. 38% of the athletes who reported anxiety symptoms had a significantly higher injury rate. Anxiety increases injury risk in males by 2.5 times and females by 1.9 times. I am the host of the Sports Medicine Broadcast, but you came here for Shauna Erickson, working on her PhD in athletic training, athletic therapy, and she is studying the psychological risk factors for injury. So I have Eli Kassab with me. We've talked to him about mental clarity with Todd, and we'll be back talking about that. And obviously, we talked about his podcast where he shares more and more of his story. So Shauna is going to share more about that study that she gave me there and the details about the psychological risk factor for injuries. But this is definitely something that over the years I've learned, and when we talked to Robert Andrews, and again Todd was part of that, and just the mental imagery, or I think he said something like deidetic imagery, something like that. So it's basically you're tricking your mind to go through that same injury without the injury. So if you did a play and tore your ACL, well, you just replay that play in your mind, but without tearing your ACL, and it reduces the psychological risk because you're mentally clearing yourself up. So that so many different aspects, and so much still to learn, but obviously Shauna is the reason we're here. This is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/psychological risk factors. Again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/psychological risk factors. So Shauna, in that study, it said that something like the anxiety symptoms had a significantly higher injury rate, and then it said 16.9% in non-anxiety people. I don't really know what that means. Can you start off by telling me just what that means?
So I think it's the statistic based on the questionnaire that they used, because they used a measure for depression and a measure for anxiety. And I believe the measure for depression was the I can never say that word, epidemiology for depression. And the second one was the state trait anxiety measure. So I think they got the percentages based off of the population of students. And that's how the percentage of the students that reported those scores.
Okay. So again, I don't really know what you're saying, but That's why you're here.
So basically the measurement that they use is a Likert scale. So you can rate different questions or different segments of that questionnaire, like on a scale from 1 to 5. Their kind of perceived answer to the questions that are asked in the questionnaires. And then they kind of just, I haven't actually done personally the measurement myself, but, and I'm still learning obviously, but then they will tab up all of those scores and do analysis, whether it's a multivariate analysis, and they control for different constructs in the questionnaire to figure out how they are responding to those questions. So based on kind of like a threshold cutoff score, they deem the certain scores whether you're exhibiting signs of depression or exhibiting signs of anxiety. And so that's how they determine whether students are suffering from both of those symptoms.
All right.
If that makes more
So
sense.
I kind of jumped right into it, and I forgot to mention Shauna is an athletic trainer. She said she did her schooling down here in Louisiana, so down here close to me. Luckily, you're gone now because they've had like 3 hurricanes in the last month or something like that.
Yep.
And so
My
right now
family's still there though.
yeah, right now she's living up in Canada, and like I said, she's working on her PhD there. So one of the things like on Instagram is kind of where we connected there. And you share a lot of your stories with injuries and things like that, and some of the adventures you've gone on, right? And so one of the stories I remember was you like almost falling off a cliff riding your bike on the side of a mountain or something like that. I was like, that's
Yeah.
And so
I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I have a feeling that it's similar for a lot of athletic trainers. Like we tend to learn more about injuries through our own. And that way we can sympathize a lot better with our athletes to understand what they're going through, and the feelings and the descriptions of pain are a lot easier to grasp, whether just from reading from a textbook and actually experiencing them ourselves. So I try to diversify my activities, and one of them is mountain biking, and I recently started that last year. So when I made the move from Oregon to Montreal, I kind of made it into a bike trip. And so I stopped in Moab, which is kind of like one of the epicenters of mountain biking. And they have a trail that's kind of like the once in a lifetime quintessential ride, and it's a shuttle ride. So they shuttle you up with your bike to the, oh, now I'm forgetting the mountains, but it's oh my gosh, I forgot the mountains. But anyway, it's a mountain range. They shuttle you up there, and then you ride downhill basically for 26 miles back into Moab. So that segment of my picture was one of the hardest spots. There's a split. There's a black diamond, and then there's a double black diamond. The double black is called the notch. The single black is called the snotch. So what it is it's basically like a way to transition down the cliffside into the valley. And you kind of have to it's like shelving. And so we ended up having to passing our bikes down the first part, because there's no way I'm not good enough to be able to transition down. But once we get to a little ledge, there's kind of a clearance of maybe 20 yards where it's like, okay, well, I'll get on and ride this part to the next little shelving that we have to climb down. So in the middle of that clearance, there's this boulder, and I don't know what happened, but I ended up stalling on the boulder. And instead of falling into the wall, I fell down, and the tree caught my fall, thankfully, otherwise I would have kept falling through. And just in time for my friend to get into the other little corner to be like, hey, I'm taking a picture. And it was perfect. So yes.
All right, so
that's what that's
so keep going with the story. So we're talking about psychological risk factors. You said you, in your trek from the West Coast to the East Coast, you were doing a bike trip. So right here in the middle of your trip, you almost fall off the cliff. And what does that do to you that when you have to finish riding that 26 miles, or when you stop for the next bike trip? So talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh my goodness. So it was so awful because I had ended up planning the next day to go to Arches National Park as well. I was also working a lacrosse tournament in Vail. I was arriving that Sunday to work the tournament for 3 days. And so I knew right away it wasn't going to be good. And I felt it in my knee, that initial achy pain. And then I got up and started evaluating myself the best I could, and I was twisting it, doing a little like thessaly on myself. I was like, well, this is not going to be great. And so I told them, and I knew I didn't want to get helivac out of there because that would have been very expensive. And I knew that I wanted to finish. So I got on my bike, and as I started pedaling, because there's no impact or no torsion on it, and I ride in flat pedals, I don't ride in clip pedals. So I actually felt better by moving it. So once I like got in my head, I was like, oh, this is actually going to be probably better for it. Like if I keep moving it and if it's not too serious, like it wasn't super painful to step on it. So I just kind of like kept cruising and, biking outside in a new environment, everything's so exciting anyways, that I think it just kind of like went into the backside until I got to another tricky part where I could kind of feel the tweak. And I was more careful with other harder features as opposed to just pushing myself. Like I would get off and walk the bike until I figured out that it actually was more painful to walk over the feature. So sometimes I would just go over it anyway. So it was a mixture of emotions for sure.
And did you continue you had a visitor in your background there?
Yeah, that's my father-in-law.
Did you? I think that out of all of these video calls, I think that may be the first time that's happened. Like it's something you see on social media all the time, but at least he was clothed, right?
Yeah. Well, so we're in red alert in Montreal. So because we have my in-laws have a place outside of the city, about an hour and a half in the country, we relocated for the next month, like we did during COVID. So sometimes they're all in the same workspace, so it happens.
All right. So, did you cancel that second day, the Arches day of bike riding?
Yes, I did, because what happened was when we finally finished the ride, I got to their campsite, and that's when I think all of the pain and the swelling started really setting in, and it was pretty bad. Since we did the whole enchilada, we ended up going to get Mexican food, and I couldn't help but get some margaritas to help congratulate myself and maybe ease the pain, even though I know that alcohol doesn't mix well with new injuries. So thankfully, I actually had my knee brace from when I tore my PCL in my car with all of the rest of my belongings. And I broke that puppy out, put it on, wrapped it, and then I went back to the hostel and elevated it. I didn't get to explore Moab. I just went to the pharmacy, bought some NSAIDs, and kind of laid up that evening. Called my boyfriend, who I was moving towards, and told him everything that happened. And so the next day, I just kind of waited until checkout for the hostel, and I drove straight to Vail and had my coworkers kind of evaluate it and see what was going on. So yeah, it cut my trip a little bit short, but it is what it was, and I know I'll have the opportunity to go back and explore more. So yeah.
All right. So were you already planning on doing a PhD in psychological risk factors before this, or did this contribute in any way?
Yes, well, that was the major reason I was moving, was to come here to go to school. Okay. I knew eventually I wanted to do a PhD. It's always been a lifetime goal of mine to kind of go all the way in school. And I thought PhD was where it stopped. And then I started learning about postdoctorates and fellowships and everything like that. So I'm just going to put the PhD as the cutoff point right now. But I didn't know that I would be pursuing it so soon, to be honest with you, because I had just moved to Oregon and got a new position there at an outreach facility called the Center Foundation. And 3 months after I moved there, I met my now boyfriend, who is from here in Canada. And when we started talking, and he knew that I was interested in pursuing my PhD, he had asked if I had, looked into Canadian schools. And honestly, I hadn't. That was kind of the last place I was going to be looking for an unknown reason, right? And so when I started looking, there was Concordia here in Montreal that was near him. Called and spoke with the director, and when I came out for a visit, we met, and we just kind of hit it off. And his research is kind of in the mental aspects as well. It's more like pain-related fear. He develops the athletic pain-related fear questionnaire. So we kind of both connected on the mental aspects. And while I hadn't applied to come that fall, he encouraged me that he would keep me updated. And so he ended up offering me the position in the spring. And it kind of all just transitioned within a couple of months. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's crazy, interesting, and just it's funny the way our life events shape where we're going. Just like Eli was talking about how he was burnt out from working 16-hour days in the NFL, and then pretty much was like depressed and had some of this other issues and health issues going on. So Eli, let's get to asking some of the psychological risk factors for injury questions that Shauna has learned about. So what you got to start with, Eli?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested. You made an interesting comment when talking about after that accident. You mentioned you being able to kind of know like, oh well, hey, that trip's always going to be there, and I'm going to be back I can always come back in a few months. And so I'm kind of like interested because like it's all about mindset and perspective, right? It's all kind of how you look at things and how you kind of mentally process situations and things that happen in your life, and perspective is kind of key. And so I'm kind of interested in that perspective that you took on it, because obviously you can go either way. You can get into that perspective of like, oh wow, this is something that can like everything's bad, this sucks, and you can kind of go into more of the negative side of things. But to kind of stop and look and think like, okay, like was that pretty natural for you to kind of more look at it as well? It's like, okay, it's okay, I can always come back later. That's something that I don't see. I don't personally. I feel like majority of people are more on the negative side of things, and don't necessarily keep that perspective. So, what was your what was your mindset like and your perspective that kind of like kind of led you to go more down that path versus down the other direction where it's like, oh, this everything's bad, this sucks, my life, and then getting into that whole rabbit hole of negative thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it's funny because I actually enrolled myself into like a self-learned mindfulness-based stress reduction course to kind of help with my studies and the eventual programs I'm going to use. And I, found out about the happiness set point, which is, very similar to our weight set point, right? So different people experience different external happenings and stressors that no matter what happens, we can always kind of reboot and come back to our home base or our happiness set point. And it's different for everybody. And some might have been born happier than others. And I firmly believe my happiness set point was kind of high. I don't know why, but I've always been able to take a situation, and as unfortunate as it is, it's not the end of the world. And while I have been a competitive athlete and I have high expectations of myself performance wise, and I can ride myself pretty hard too, especially like if I think I'm failing at something. But I think in that moment, because I had so much other things going on and I was moving towards a complete transition in my career, a new life, and creating like a home with my boyfriend and expanding our relationship and moving to a new country, being an international student, there was just, I think, so much else that I was looking forward to, that in that moment, just being in Moab, being able to bike that specific trail in my first season of mountain biking was pretty epic in the first place. So to have kind of a little bit of a setback where, okay, it didn't go as I expected, but to be able to get out of there in one piece and knowing what I know and having my background and being able to like have access to the resources as the athletic trainers at the camp. Like I knew I was going to be going to see them. So I knew I was going to be taken care of. I knew that I could take care of myself. And it wasn't like an end all be all for me because I experienced injuries like that before. So I knew that based on my strength level that I was going to recover quicker. And I wasn't going to be out of biking forever. So it wasn't like a season ending sort of injury. It was just a momentarily setback. So I think that's where I was at with that.
Nice. That's awesome. I think, and you mentioned that mental, mental clarity, but like the happiness portion. Now, was that, you said it was like a program or a course or something like that you were doing?
Yeah, so there's a free course online. I'm trying to think of what it's called. So it's the palacemindfulness.com. And he created the mindfulness project at the University of Massachusetts Health Center. And so he delivers an 8-week course online that's free. And it's self-taught. So he provides the videos, he provides the literature, and you kind of just go through it on a weekly basis, and then you're responsible for being involved in the mindfulness practice, like the informal and the formal practices. So I was looking, because my supervisors and I had talked about me potentially delivering a mindfulness training program to the athletes that I'm doing research with. And like personally, I was like, I've never done that before. Like I've practiced mindfulness personally, but as far as like feeling competent to deliver the program myself, I don't know what to say or what to do. So they said maybe you should take a course. And a lot of the courses I had looked at were at least 500 Canadian. So I found this one, and it was a free course, and I said this could be like as good as it gets right now. So that's what I decided to do, and it's been great. I'm in my second week, so, and that's what I found out about the happiness set point, which was perfect for your question.
Yeah, that was always interesting to kind of like what leads to those changes. It's always interesting. Like I thought maybe there was something that had happened prior that led you to maybe doing something like that. And so that's why I was like, it was interesting to hear, because it's always, what's a deciding factor? Like, why do we head down, make certain decisions on certain paths?
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's all about the history of our stressors, right? So we all cognitively appraise stressors differently and process them in a different way, just based on our upbringing, our experiences, like our previous injuries, our coping mechanisms. Everything is different and varies from person to person. So you can never really anticipate what's going to happen or how someone's going to react, right?
Exactly. And how has that been able now, obviously, like in with athletes and in the clinical setting, how has that helped? I know the experience itself, like going through that accident and everything, can help relate, but does going through that course as well as like trying to make an effort to gain a different perspective and a different mindset, has that been able to translate over into the clinical setting outside of you personally in your own mindset perspective? Has that been able to translate, in the clinic with the athletes, as far as just being able to relate to them or kind of help guide them if there are those that are looking to do something similar?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, currently I'm not in a clinical base. Like I don't see athletes like when they're like, I'm not on the field practicing as an athletic trainer right now.
Gotcha.
But I am strength training one-on-one. So it does help in my coaching, where I am perceptive in picking up emotions or anxiety, especially like if you can internally feel that something's off with your athlete. And I think that has always been, like, I was practicing for 8 years before I decided to go back to school. So I think we were always had that intuitive feeling. I mean, as athletic trainers, we have that. And we know when something's not right with our athletes. And so being able to just open up the dialogue, and getting athletes comfortable with letting themselves explain or even verbalize how they're feeling, right? And I definitely took time to be able to do that when I was practicing in the high school setting. And because it's the same with describing pain. They were always kind of unsure of like, well, it hurts. Okay, well, how does it hurt? Like, does it feel like this? Or we would give them those segues to kind of like be able to think about it and critically process what's happening to them. So I think that plays in part with their emotional status as well as their injury status too. So I was always constantly trying to do that with athletes and trying to get a better understanding of everything else that was going on outside of their sport. So just like, how is school going? Is it finals? Are you having extra loads of homework? And just depending on their situation at home, like, are your parents helping? Are they providing more pressure? So a lot of different perspectives that went into it to be able to talk about all of those different things with them when you get the opportunity. Like, they're in there, like, talk to them about everything you potentially can, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I agree. No, yeah, and that's the thing. Sorry, Jeremy, feel free. Sorry, I'm kind of just keep going, but if you,
I do. Okay, so since you jumped in there, since you offered me, I do want to say, I am not the natural athletic trainer with the emotional IQ, right? If honestly, I swear, if we hadn't done foster care and then to do the trauma-based care or trauma-informed care stuff with the TBRI, then I probably would still be like emotionally dumb. I don't know like what it is, but I just didn't process people's emotional needs. So it was just, yeah. So not everybody is that intelligent, okay?
I was gonna say, no, not everyone has that natural capability. We're not all super attuned to emotions. And I think it just is based on the person too. I don't know how I became so emotionally attuned to people or perceptive. From like when I was 18 and I, random fact, I traveled around with a hypnotist for a summer. But and so she ended up telling me that I was a natural healer and that I had a very spiritual kind of personality or a persona about myself. And I never really thought of it that way. And I was like, oh, okay. So then when I started like dealing with athletes on a one-on-one basis, and like I would ask them if everything was okay, and they're like, no, how did you know that? You know, those types of responses. And I'm like, well, I don't know, I'm just asking. So I think I think it definitely varies on person to person.
All right, so
Yeah, and
I definitely want to get back to the psychological risk factors, but you can't just say I traveled around with a hypnotist for a summer and then walk away.
Thought you would kind of like glaze over that.
No. Come on, let's go.
Okay. So what happened? What happened was I went to we went to an amusement park at Six Flags in Valencia, California, and it was the Halloween like their Fright Fest thing, but it was during my brother's birthday. So then we found out there was a hypnotist show, and I had actually never been to one. And so we went to it, and it was the hypnotist show where you have all of the volunteers on stage, and she induces you, and then you kind of like you get commands or suggestions to do things, and it's filmed and it's funny, and we laugh, and then they wake you up. Well, I was a volunteer, and I came back to the audience, and my mom was telling me all the things I had done. I didn't remember any of them, and then the following week, my mom called to order some of her self-hypnosis CDs and ended up speaking with the hypnotist herself. And of course, my mom, being who she is, if you ever need any help, my daughter would love to help you. And so that's how that began. And she's like, actually, like my assistant's going to be gone this weekend. I could use an extra set of hands. So I drove down. She paid for my gas, my hotel, like the whole weekend was paid for. Plus I got paid to be her assistant. So was basically a stage assistant with a hypnotist for that short time. And then a few years later, she asked me to travel around with her for the summer, and we ended up going to Hawaii twice, and all up and down California for fair shows. So it was a very good experience. But I think she was probably, okay, now that I'm thinking about it and talking about it, she was probably the biggest turning point in the types of people that I met and surrounded myself with, because she was very spiritual, just those pleasant people to be around. They're uplifting, they're encouraging, they're supportive, they're just naturally good people that see the best in everybody. And it was such a positive influence in my life at that moment in time, because I was 20, 21, kind of like trying to figure out what career choice I wanted to make. And so and everybody that she came into contact with was exactly the same. I mean, they were all working, all entertainers. And so they were just uplifting and positive, and just had their own personal spiritual practice. She got me on like the regular healthy routine of eating better and working out every day. And so I think it was just one of those major turning points that sent me in my direction, in my path. So yeah, now that we got into that. Yeah. And if you ever want to look her up, she's Tina Marie, and she's based out of Las Vegas.
Tina Marie from Las Vegas. I'll look her up right now.
Oh man, yeah.
No, that's really cool. I had no idea. This is Tina Marie.
Yeah, so I would help her out with on stage stuff as well as off stage. So we would handle like the business part, the filming, traveling. I was mainly her full-time assistant, and it was a lot of fun.
That's interesting because your life experience is shaped, and I'd say what it sounds like is there's a gap. Like, so you did this when you're, in college, but then you did athletic training, and then you came back to this thing that you realized this is really where I want to be. And then now just even talking about it here, you're realizing, oh, that was a big key point, a turning point. And it's just interesting that we get put in places at certain times. Nobody ever wants to deal with a kid dying, but we had a kid die and perform CPR, and it changed a lot of things in the way that I look and treat people, but it also changes the stories that I'm able to tell. And it was right at the time that the AT Cares was coming about, and we were working on creating and building something, and just the life experiences, the way they shape you, and they allow you to practice as an athletic trainer more efficiently. So
exactly. Well, and then making it commonplace to talk about emotions was huge for me, because I think that I was starting to get a better understanding of the pressures from coaches, and it was a common theme for athletes to not want to say when they were injured, or to say that something was wrong because they were going to be viewed differently from their teammates and from their coaches. And I think that was a big deal. And I was having a hard time understanding, like, why can't you just tell me that something's wrong? Like, why are your coaches treating you differently because something's wrong? Like, that shouldn't be how it is. And so I was having a very difficult time accepting the way that was. And so it was, I would talk to the coaches, I would talk to the athletes, and we would have to like come to a common base or an understanding, like we're all in the care of our athletes. The game is the game. The sport is the sport. The sport's always going to be there. They're going to have these opportunities. But right now, in this moment, they're not okay. And they think that they're not going to be able to play for the rest of the season if something's wrong, or that you are going to punish them because something's wrong, whether it's emotional punishment or just self-perceived punishment, right? And so that's kind of how that grew. And I didn't know that I was going to make this my PhD focus. I didn't think I was going to be in the depths of it like I am now. But like, I'm thankful that I am, because I'm hoping by contributing and talking like to, professionals like you guys, and just making it more known and more commonplace for us to be able to talk about these things. And I think that's the transition that the sports industry is going. And I hope that it continues to go down that path, especially like, with the coaching culture, with coaching by fear, and everything that's being, brought out into the open with those sorts of environments with college settings. So yeah, I'm hoping that it continues from there.
And you brought up like something interesting, kind of that struck a chord with the athletes, and we're talking to them and through injuries, and they tend to, they're afraid to either say something about their injury, and they're thinking about the season and thinking about then, and that's one thing I've kind of seen and found myself, addressing with, athletes and injuries, is they go from 0 to 100 in their head really quick. Mm-hmm. And it's, and that's something I feel like is really common, where they start looking ahead and they start thinking about the rest, and kind of forget to focus on, the things that we can kind of control, and the kind of the here and now. And so that's a conversation I just had a conversation with an athlete of mine yesterday. And I mean, he was just like already, at the end of the book, chapter 52. And I'm like, hey, let's read chapter 1 first.
Oh no.
Chapter 2, and then
mm-hmm.
And so that strikes a chord, because that's something that I see a lot, and I think it's really easy for athletes to go instantly to try to get to the end of the story and look at worst case scenario, and you got to kind of reel them back in, and then use our experience and use our tools and our experiences to kind of bring them back to the present, and kind of change their mindset in that moment to just mm-hmm. focus on the here and now, because that's something that I've seen happen quite a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, we can get caught up too. We can, be, when we get our witty banter going with our athletes, and we're like, don't be so dramatic, or that's not what's going to happen. Yeah. It really is what they're experiencing. And like we want to give it a playful aspect without demeaning or downplaying what they're experiencing. So just being accepting of their emotions and like, yeah, this is what they're catastrophizing. That tends to happen. And if we're more used to it than normal, then we don't need to make fun of it, right? And just being acknowledging their perceptions and kind of just guiding them like, okay, that's going to be worst case scenario, but we don't even know what's wrong with you yet. So let's just do this little evaluation to get a better understanding of where we're at. And then if I think you should go see the doctor, I mean, we walk them through the steps. Like, these are the baby steps we're going to take to double check. Like, we have no idea yet. So it's not going to do you any good. It's not going to do me any good or the team any good if you're overreacting to the situation. So I think that's exactly where we play a really integral role for that.
And every person's a little bit different with their, obviously with, psychological risk factors as far as like how we address them and how they deal with. And it's, you got to basically use your experiences, clinically, obviously always tailored toward the orthopedic side of things, but even on the psychological part, that's something that's every athlete, and this, but it's every athlete's different. Every person, you talk to every person, you kind of have to a little bit differently. And some of them are more open, some of them are reserved, some of them you can read easier, some of them you can't. And so it gets kind of it just becomes harder to navigate that. And so I think it's really important to get experience, but B, being able to recognize those. And if you can't, because some of us, like Jeremy was saying earlier, some of us, maybe don't see it, but that's okay. I think at least just knowing about those potential risk factors and educating, obviously athletes on the resources available, there, and making sure that there is support and help, needed. If they need it, then that's something that's, I think is always good to at least make sure that the athlete's informed about and educated on.
Totally. Well, and I think too, it's extremely important for us as athletic trainers to have our own, this is part of my study that I'm working on, is creating a survey for athletic trainers as well, athletic therapists as well, to get it's like a perception survey of mindfulness. So how many athletic trainers are aware of mindfulness, how many actually practice it themselves, because being emotionally apt is not everybody's forte, but we can practice those things, we can learn those things, and it's not something that we're going to be taught in our undergrad. It's learned through experience, whether it's personal or career wise, and then taking those courses that kind of where we're looking in to identify our own emotions and accepting them and acknowledging them without judgment, which is what mindfulness is based on, and then being able to do that for somebody else, or teaching them to be able to do that. And then that makes it easier for our athletes to be able to describe what's going on and be aware of what they're experiencing to communicate better with us as practitioners. So I think that's going to be a goal of mine as well, is to help athletic trainers dive into their psychological practice and mental health a lot better as well, because I know burnout is obviously a thing in athletic training. And so if we're not handling our mental health as well as our physical health, how are we helping our athletes? And that kind of just is what we project, right? So, yeah.
Right. No, exactly, 100%. And I think that's great. I think that's, accurate. Yeah. How can we, if we can't learn to identify psychological factors within ourselves and address them, and try to make changes on our own personally, how do we now help athletes that could potentially be going through the same thing, and those are things. I think something like that would be great, because it is vital and it is important. And I don't think necessarily a lot of clinicians have I want to say don't have time, but sometimes you get so busy where you don't want to focus or think about that stuff, because it's just extra work, as the way that they look at it. But, certainly being able to help clinicians understand that, to better at least relate to the athlete or just patient, because different settings. But
Yeah. Well, and I think time is like the number one excuse for doing anything, right? Like we never have enough time to do this. We never have enough time to research. And I think if it's part of our core practice, then we make time for it. And I think that the psychological side of things is part of our core practice. Like that's a huge part. And so we kind of have to like schedule that block, whether it's before bed or in the evenings when we're doing our research or we're looking over cases or are, updating our soap notes, things like that. Like take 10 minutes for yourself to just be still, and looking at it like that. Like how are you incorporating stillness or just, no thoughts throughout the day, and kind of go from there to see how everybody does it. So it's, yeah.
So on just a real quick note, I know Headspace during 2020 has like the free premium subscription for healthcare providers. You'd have to Google it, or I know it's like sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/headspace, and I think I have the info link there. And honestly, without using that Headspace app where it's talking about allow those thoughts to drift in and out, and just focus on your breathing, I truly would be lost when it comes to stuff like that. And I don't do it all that often. But I do it some, but I still use that. Like when I'm trying to fall asleep, I count my breaths, and it allows me to kind of let go of whatever thoughts I was doing. So all that is fantastic reminder, especially right now. I was busy, and I was saying at the beginning where yesterday was pretty hectic because of the whole COVID exposure and trying to, have like an emergency backup plan for games and things that were going to go on, or possible varsity games without athletic trainers and things like that. Shauna, moving a little bit towards what you're seeing in your research.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about what you're finding? Maybe some interesting facts, maybe some shocking things about what you have found so far.
So last year I wrote a paper it's a critically appraised topic, and I'm still waiting to hear back from the journal because it was the first critically appraised topic that they'd ever seen with systematic reviews. Because normally you take a couple of randomized controlled trials because it's a small area of research, and then you kind of develop this little 10-pager for clinicians to be like, oh, this is an issue, this is how we address it, and now I can put it into applied practice. So the fact that we originally thought this was a small area of research is actually, for the prediction side of things, it's pretty profound. There's, the original stress and injury model was established in the 80s by Williams and Anderson, and that was, basically depicting 3 different constructs. It was coping resources, personality, and injury history, and kind of funneling those down into the stress response. And that was the mediator between all of those categories into injury. And then they have the intervention that goes underneath the stress response. And so by using an intervention to mediate the stress response, you therefore can potentially reduce risk of the injury outcome. Then more recently, there was a biopsychosocial model that was developed as an extension that kind of has like 4 different constructs. It has the psychophysiological, it has just the physiological, and then it has the behavioral mechanisms, and then it funnels into potentially negative health outcomes as well as injury. So by, trying to some of the research has identified at-risk athletes by doing questionnaires that are based on the original stress and injury model. And then when you identify at-risk athletes, then doing a psychological or psychosocial based intervention with those athletes to decrease their risk for injury. But most of the research for intervention programs are actually geared towards all athletes. Like every athlete can benefit from a psychosocial intervention because it's going to help them develop coping mechanisms. It's going, the things we've talked about with mindfulness, being able to recognize inside intrinsic factors that may be potentially causing them further injury risk without them even realizing it. And with college athletes or with any student athletes, you're looking at a lot of pressures that don't necessarily involve particularly sport. And sports psychologists, they've mainstayed their interventions to reduce competitive anxiety or something that's directly related to sports performance. And so the whole realm of intervening for the purpose of reducing injury risk is more new. And so there's been the most recent systematic review was done by Gledhill and colleagues, and that was done in 2018. And he found 14 studies that were within that stress and injury model and also outside of it to make sure he didn't miss any sort of randomized control trial that might have been from a different perspective. So anything from cognitive behavioral therapy, imagery, a video awareness program, all showed significant effects on reducing injury, whether it was competitive or practice-based. And so I mean, then you can get into the types of injury. Like, I think they are sort of hypothesizing that overuse injuries are the ones most recognized being associated with anxiety and depression, because when you hang on to stress or you hang on to depression and it builds and it builds and it builds, it has that physiological side effect that makes our bodies harder to recover from training sessions. So we could potentially be putting ourselves at risk for injury because our muscles aren't recovering. We're suppressing our immune system. And those are more kind of like the long-term effects of stress. And then you can think of like acute stress, where your nervous system plays that role with the fight or flight. And so you have your muscle tension, your peripheral narrowing, that all kind of plays into that acute moment on field stress that can potentially set up someone for injury risk. So providing those interventions to mitigate cognitive appraisal of a stressor, like, so changing someone's perception of stress can really help reduce their risk factor. So yeah, that's just a little bit I've gained so far.
Is that all?
No, there's more.
Yeah. Oh man, wow. No, and so with what sorry, and this might be completely not necessarily on track, but with beginning on the research part of it, how long was your, just out of curiosity, how long was the duration of your research? How long did you basically spend
for that paper particularly?
Yeah.
We started formulating our question January, and then I finally got it submitted after several edits in mid-July. So, and I think the reason that we're waiting to hear, my supervisor had emailed the editor-in-chief, and they said we don't know how to process this because they're using systematic reviews, which I thought was funny because they actually have a template if you're using systematic reviews. Like, they have the template for the randomized control trials, how to break down the different tables, and then they also have the ones that are you're focusing on different categories for the systematic reviews. So, but I included 3 systematic reviews, but narrowed it down to the 1 because it was the most recent, and it also included the same studies the previous 2 had used in their meta-analysis. So by using kind of like a blending of all of the articles, and then it was able to provide an additional 2 randomized control trials that had come out, were published later than the other reviews, and that's why they didn't have them. And then as well as an additional randomized control trial that was published in 2019, and it was a mindfulness-based intervention. And so far there's been 2 that we know of that are mindfulness-based interventions, specifically with the intention of reducing injury risk and measuring before and after for season. So that's kind of like where I would like to go, but obviously we're going to be targeting a different population because the other 2 studies was professional athletes in Iran and male soccer players by Iverson. I have to double check the population for that, but I know that my population is different. So the more that we can, obviously broaden that, the better.
1 second, not to ignore you. I gotta plug this in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
So if you're watching the video, Eli just ducked underneath the table to plug in his phone.
Saw nothing.
Hide and seek. No.
Yeah. So Iranian
Yeah.
professional athletes. Yeah, definitely need to get a little bit. It'll be good to get a little bit more focused with that.
Yeah.
That's oh man.
All right, so Shauna,
God.
this wasn't in any way planned, but just talking about like being able to mentally process the stress, and how do you think COVID has impacted people? Like, have more people been injured because of the stress of COVID? Do you have any of that information out yet?
No, okay, that's so funny because I'm actually speaking with my supervisor after our meeting. Um, and one of my thought processes is, I started waking up in, early mornings when I start thinking about my projects and making sure that I'm getting enough done and, have a little bit of my stressful moments of like, how is this changing my research? Because practices are canceled for the next month. Like they closed off sports again in Montreal. So, and then technically they don't have a season. So I can't measure injury risk with my programs because they're not at risk for injury. And their practice scenario is completely different because they're limited in their contact and they're limited in their time. So the injury risk exposure is not the same as it would have been if I were measuring it in a regular season. So we were trying to figure out what we were going to do to transition. And the survey is one of them. The virtual based mindfulness program is another. But then in my head, like the past few days is like, how can I incorporate the COVID situation? Because athletes who are used to exercising and moving and being around their teammates every day are now having to stay home, practice on their own, and having meetings virtually. So how does this play into the mentality of an athlete, and how would this potentially expose them for further injury risk? And my initial thought is they're actually reducing their injury risk right now because they don't have the same intensity of their practices or their training sessions, because I think personally, like in my mind, they're not working towards something right now. Like they know that they may have a season in the winter, but they may not. This just depends on everything that happens. So we're trying to treat this as an official off season where they can take advantage of all of these things that they may not be focused on originally. Like if they're in the heat of a season, they're not going to focus on a mindfulness training project. They're not going to focus on extra strength training and like a true off season program. Taking the time to make sure that their bodies are being well taken care of, that they're getting enough sleep. And I think now is the best time to take advantage of all of that with everything going on. But I also think that there's sort of a catastrophizing mentality of a lot of people, and not just athletes in general, but everyone is like, thinking the worst of everything that's happening. Like, oh, what if this doesn't happen? Like we have these things scheduled. And so, it just ends up cascading. And if I can provide, that mindfulness training to sort of reel everyone back and bring them back to, like as we talked about, Eli, like what we can control right now. Like we know that the future is uncertain, and we can plan the best that we can, but have to be flexible in knowing that it may change. And unfortunately, I think for athletes that can be, detrimental to their career if they're potentially looking at going professional, or even high school athletes that want to play in college, but they're not getting the same exposure. So, I mean, there's a lot of things at play that they could be going through emotionally that is not the greatest, but the best that we can do to help them cope, I think is the most I can do at this point. So no, I don't have information, but I'm thinking of incorporating some of that into the surveys.
That's wonderful. I think, and when you were about, kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, I know for me, we've got a sports psychologist on the team who's awesome. And when the whole COVID thing kind of hit in the midst of it, we had developed a little information sheet handout that we had sent out to the athletes, just something, because obviously everyone struggles and handles it a little bit differently, but that was something we kind of just, he had put together and kind of sent it out there, just as an information piece to help, those kind of, cope through that time. Because like you said, it's all over the place with these athletes as far as going to college, going professional, and all different points in their lives. And so that was something I thought was really cool that he ended up putting together. And I sent it out to some other teams and stuff like that, just to kind of help. But that was something I thought was a great idea to do with some of the athletics population.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that, and maybe I can incorporate some of those questions.
Yeah, I'll dig it up.
Okay.
See if I can get it sent your way.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
That'd be awesome.
Right, I do have one other unrelated question, but before we get to that, do you have any other like interesting finds? Anything we hadn't covered? Anything that maybe it's really important for us to know or to look forward to?
I mean, the whole area has been a very interesting find, and I think my biggest goal is going to be how can I help athletic trainers and other sports medicine practitioners really incorporate some of these things into their injury prevention practices. And I think that was the main purpose of my critically appraised topic is it's been shown that by incorporating some sort of psychosocial intervention, you're reducing your athlete's risk injury. And I'm a huge proponent of injury prevention because the more work we put in on the front end, the less we have to do on a treatment basis. And, and to sell this to the coaches, like, look, if we do this, you're going to have your players, the same reasons that we sell, certain warm-ups or tailored programming for their athletes is like, you're going to keep your athletes longer, you're going to have less injuries, and you probably could have a more successful season. So this is just one of those components that, that has been kind of overlooked as that part of that program. So I think the more that I can do to help promote that and help practitioners become more confident in their ability to deliver these programs and educate their student athletes on this area, I think the more successful our profession is going to become, and the more successful our athletes are going to be, not as just athletes and competitive players, but also as citizens in their community and their relationships with people. So I think it's just, it's that overall holistic approach to our athletic care that we should be providing, or working with someone that is experienced in those categories that can also provide more to our practice and create that connection with other providers as well. So I think that's the most important takeaway that I'm getting so far, and want to continue to provide and contribute to the scientific research area with that.
So looking at our last period athletics, we have about 45 minutes where we have probably 30 kids coming in, either needing tape or rehab or injury evaluation or foam rolling, stretching. During that time, there's the two of us working, like I said, for about 45 minutes with about 30 kids, trying to get them to practice or rehab, summer surgeries, that kind of thing. How can we incorporate the mindfulness into that time? Is there a simple tool that's out there now?
I would say that there are apps, obviously, like the students can download the apps, and if they were to so choose to take 10 minutes before their practice to practice and use the guided meditation or mindfulness apps, they could. In that time frame, I would say our first and primary focus is getting athletes ready for practice. And so like the more acute injuries are going to take more precedence than the ones that are post-surgical. So I would say, like with your post-surgical athletes, you could incorporate mindfulness with their treatment, walk them through breathing techniques while you're doing ultrasound, walking them through breathing techniques while they're doing a specific exercise, or just incorporate 5 minutes during their rehab program. Like they do all their exercises, and then before they get their treatment, they do their mindfulness. And then that's just written into their program sheet, right? Or their exercises, like making that more of a part of their program, I think is going to make it easier for you to deliver, as well as them to say, oh, I need to do this. Like this, I have to do this to get better. and getting that mentality shift going. As far as like doing it more on like a team wise, I think bringing the coaches in, or like your preseason meetings, talking to them about like, hey, I think that we should be incorporating this with your athletes. Would you be willing, and like selling it to them, would you be willing to dedicate 10 to 15 minutes before practice, after practice, to deliver these programs? And coaches can deliver a mindfulness program. You just have to give it to them. So I think that's where we can right now in the short term be able to try and squeeze and work our way to making that shift into our care.
I think that's, I don't know why I've never thought about that, but it would be super easy. Just like if I have Headspace on the computer, I say, okay, hey, Susie, your part of your deal today is while you're doing your complex quad, or even just your complex recovery, then we're going to play this. Don't worry about the leg. It's already working with the machine. Mm-hmm. So you're just going to sit and listen. No matter what else is going on, you get 5-10 minutes incorporated into the middle of practice, and writing that in as part of it. Now, obviously, it's not going to completely work because unless like have them download it and do headphones.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to do it like in the athletic training room, just saying, here, follow this program, then that could work too. Is where, okay, focus on listening to the stereo, focus on the 5 minutes of mindfulness. You're just kind of clearing your mind while your leg is already doing the work, doing the treatment. That's a really cool idea. And seeing, possibly we do use a lot of foam rollers, and so maybe it's something where we have that speaker set up. Okay, guys, while you're foam rolling, we're just going to do 2 minutes of foam rolling with mindfulness, and they're still being able to just clear their thoughts. So definitely an interesting concept or possibility to incorporate that. And it may be something that we have to incorporate, at 3:30 instead of at 2:45 whenever the huge rush is, and we just do it with those few kids, try it out and things like that.
To start, so. Yeah, exactly. And then, I think if you do it with your kids that are obviously not practicing and you have more time with them, then the other students are going to notice what they're doing, and they're going to wonder and ask questions. And then that's when that's opening the dialogue, right, for the interests. And so like, if you want to do this too, you need to come in during this time, or you can come in after practice and I'll sit with you and do it, or make an appointment with you throughout the day if they have a free period and you're a full-time athletic trainer, or during their lunch hour, to come in and sit with you and do those things. So I mean, just piquing their interest, because if that athlete's doing it, then they're going to want to do it too.
So right now, say our football team, they have like a little stereo out there that they play music during practice. Mm-hmm. Would incorporating that at the end of practice, say, okay, we're all done, everybody's done, okay, everybody lay down on the grass and we're going to do 5-10 minutes of mindfulness, right? So it's going to be different with high school boys, and they're going to be awkward at first, but it would be something that we could potentially do right then, right? It doesn't have to be before practice.
Oh, exactly. No, I mean, if my ideal situation is like the last 15 to 20 minutes, they're doing yoga or static stretching, and they're doing some sort of reflection anyways, and just being in themselves to reflect on how practice went. And then that's when you could also incorporate the mindfulness or doing the guided meditation. Like, okay, you've done your stretches. Now we're just going to lay down and be quiet. And, sort of have that going and create that routine and that stigma to be like, this is what we're doing because this is what research shows help. And you're going to recover better. You're going to sleep better. You're going to make better choices. You're going to appraise your stressors differently. Your reactions on the field are going to be different. Like, it just makes them all around a better player. And if that's how you sell it and promote it to the coaches and integrate it like this. So if I'm doing your injury prevention program as a whole, like your warm-ups should be this and your cool downs should be this, right? And that's what we have the most knowledge of doing. And so that's, I think, the best way to kind of sell it, promote it, and integrate it.
All right. So I think the last question here is, you are working on your PhD. You just started a personal training, like a business, an online business, right? You're doing lots of different things there. You're also staying fit. You're adventurous. You're moving across the country. What are you personally doing? What does your personal mindfulness look like?
Since I've started the program, I'm actually like doing formal practice where it's a 30-minute body scan, and so it just takes you up and down and walks you through, like paying attention to your toe, paying attention to the arch of your foot, like paying specific attention to different parts of your body, because everybody carries stress differently or in different areas of the body, and it could manifest into a particular joint based on our injury history. So I practice yoga almost every day, 30 minutes during our lunchtime, and we actually established that while being at COVID. So the whole family at noon, we stop work, we come out, we do yoga, uninterrupted sometimes there's phone calls, but we can't help that. So, just trying to tell myself and making it okay with, like, I'm allowed to do these things. Like, this should be part of our normal practice. Like, why we feel bad for taking time for ourselves has been unnecessarily negatively projected. For some reason, like, we always feel bad that we can't just sit still for 30 minutes. We feel like we should always be doing something, or we feel bad that we're not cleaning, or we're not being productive in our work. So making it more acceptable to take that time for ourselves, because then that makes us just better people in general and a more positive world, essentially. So yeah, that's where I'm at with my personal practice.
All right, so the big question I've been waiting to ask, with your summer travels with the hypnotist, were you ever allowed to practice that on anybody?
No, you have to go to school for hypnotherapy.
Okay.
Yes, it's something that you should be qualified, licensed, and have education in doing, because you could get in trouble. That's why there's no video-based hypnosis, because if someone stays asleep at home, then that's not good. But as far as like the calming wording, like that kind of comes into with mindfulness, because you're trying to get someone to cognitively just relax and turn off and let their system go. So I would say mindfulness could be considered a base or a form of hypnotherapy, but without inducing them to release their inhibitions completely, right? So yeah.
Very good. All right, we mentioned the fact that Shauna is an athletic trainer. She's currently working towards her PhD, working also towards becoming an athletic therapist, because in Canada, an athletic trainer, like we've done those podcasts with the World Federation, so there's an athletic therapist there in Canada, and so she's working towards that certification as well. And so one of the partners that I have with the podcast is physicaltherapy.com, where you can do physicaltherapy.com/one free course. And I haven't looked to see, but there may be courses about mindfulness and teaching mindfulness and things like that. So as an athletic therapist, do you still have to get like BOC CEUs, or is that like you have to do stuff for athletic training and then you have to do different things for athletic therapist?
So I'm right now, I'm provisional, since the exam, their national certification exam, was canceled for June. It's rescheduled in January, so they allowed me to be considered provisional, and so I'll sit for the exam in January. But as far as like continuing education, majority of the state's CEUs can transfer and count as the CEUs for athletic therapy. I think they are a little bit less. I want to say they're 25 CEUs every 2 years. So it's not as significant, but athletic therapy is a lot smaller up here, and still developing. So I think that might change in the future. But for now, I'm paying 2 sets of dues and only need 1 set of CEUs. So that's great.
Yeah, could be worse. All right,
exactly.
So Movement Matters on Instagram. That's probably going to be the best place to find Shauna. Any other way that you would like for people to reach out and contact you?
Through my link tree on Movement Matters, it has my website that you can visit to check out all of the programs I offer. One of them being the Complete Athlete Program, where I actually that's one of my ways of promoting it within the athletic training world, is to go to high schools, go to different sporting programs, and kind of deliver this all-in-one complete athlete day. Like, it's a day program, and then I take the athletes through all of the different aspects that go into being a well-developed athlete. And I encourage the athletic trainers to participate as well as the coaches, and they help develop the full day's segments. But We can talk about that later. But so my website, and then I'm also on Facebook as well. So,
all right.
Yeah.
And so typically, if someone's going to search your name, like every time I do, it auto corrects to the SON, so it's Shauna Eric Sin with the
Because I'm
EN and not
Danish.
the
Yes.
ON. Obviously,
Yes.
in the sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/psychological risk factors, I'll have the links to get a hold of Shauna there. But MVMT.matter, so movement matters on Instagram, is a great way to get hold of Shauna there, and she'd post a lot of content and some, like I said, her stories where she was talking about falling off the bike off the side of the mountain, things like that. Eli Kassab, also known as the AT TikTok, AT Twitter type guy, so super popular on social media there. So ELIKASSAB. So Eli Kassab. Any other way you want people to get a hold of you?
Anything. Just Google. No, I mean, yeah. Just Google my name. I'm all over social. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, everything.
All of it.
And it's all just my name. Nothing creative.
If you want to sponsor some leggings for, Movement Matters all across the leggings, get Eli to do a TikTok. There you go. Working on some sponsorships.
I will rock those.
You will rock those. Get you some. Actually, it was funny because Eli talks about one of the athletes that he just met said, "Oh, you're the AT TikTok guy, right?" So it's popular. It's popular. You go get some sponsored pants.
You'll just take a look through it. You'll know what we're talking about, Shauna.
I think I've seen the TikTok athletic trainer. I didn't realize that was you. Awesome. I'll pay attention more closely now.
I will find you on Movement Matters. I'm going to follow that link that Jeremy's going to post on the Sports Medicine broadcast. So I'll find you on there and hunt you down.
Yeah, we'll communicate after this for sure. All right,
so
perfect.
On Instagram, social media, most places I'm either Mr. Jeremy Jackson or Sports Medicine Broadcast. And obviously, if you're a regular listener, then you know how to get to sportsmedicinebroadcast.com. And again, this one is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/psychological risk factors, which I always have trouble spelling psychological anyway. So just get it close and we'll go from there. So for Jeremy, Shauna, Eli, Movement Matters, and the Sports Medicine Broadcast, that is a wrap. Thanks.